Hello again and welcome to Dapsy Chess. It's been a minute, so much has been going on, and sorry I've not been able to make back to back to back videos, but that's gonna change soon. I'm working on that. So many things are going on, but in the absence of that, I said, I've been getting a lot of messages, both in person and on emails about, what, I would really like to have a beginner's introduction to the game chess. So like this video is pretty much for someone that has zero idea about the game. So when you see this video, you could actually, after going through this video, you could actually say, I have an idea of how to play the game chess and what the things I need to do, what are the things I'm looking for when I'm playing the game and stuff like that. So this video is for total beginners. You know, you have zero idea about the game, like I said earlier. So let us get right into it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to clear the board. We have a starting position right here, right? So I'm going to start with the coordinates of the board. Now, if you look closely, we have the letters. We have the letter A right there, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So these letters run vertically across the chest, but that means they go from all the way up and down, or vice versa, whichever way you want to say it, or all the way from up, all the way down, or down, all the way up. So these letters are what we call the files, Files, the files. All right. You're going to see why we need to know all these things. So these are called the files. Remember this, in a game of chess, on a chessboard, the letters run vertically across the chessboard. That means they go up and down. These are what we call the files. Now, if you really look closer, we're going to see numbers on the side right here. So that's number one, that's number two, that's number three, that's number four, number five, number six, number seven, and number eight. Now, these numbers are what we refer to as the ranks. So that's the eighth rank, that's the seventh rank, the sixth rank, the fifth rank, the fourth rank, the third rank, the second rank, and the first rank. Now, the ranks run horizontally across the chessboard. Don't forget that. The ranks run horizontally across the chessboard. Now, what's the big deal of this? Why do we need to know the files and the ranks? Like I said, we'll get right into this. Now, each square on the board has a name. Every single square you see on the chessboard, like we all have names. My name is Dapo, and we all have names. So every square on the board has a name. So the reason why we have the letters running vertically and the numbers running horizontally is to be able to name each square. For example, I'm going to put a circle right here, and I'm going to ask us, what square would this be? Yes, you got it right. That's going to be the E5 because it's on the E file and it's on the fifth rank. So that square is the E5 square. And of course, it's a dark square. And that's another thing we have to note about the game of chess. It's about the light squares and the dark square. So we have the E5 square right there. Okay. Okay, let's make another example. I'm going to put a circle right here. Right here. Now, what's the name of the square on that circle I just put? What square would that be? Okay, let's find out. It's on the B file, right? And it's on what rank? The seventh rank. So that's the B7 square. So this is how we pretty much name each square on a chessboard. Like I said, every square on the board has a name. So that's the B7 square. And what about the square right here? That would be F7. So that square right there is the F7 square. This is the very, very beginning of what you need to know about the game chess. We need to know what the board is about, the names on the boards and stuff like that. And one thing also we have to learn with the chess. In chess, we have three main lines. Three main lines. We have the vertical line going up and down, right? We have the horizontal line, and then we have the diagonal line. Everything you do on the chessboard is going to have something to do with these lines: the horizontal line, the vertical, and the diagonal. Every movement of the pieces except the knight. So we have, like I said again, three lines. We have the horizontal line, up and down, sorry, left to right. We have the vertical, up and down, and then we have the diagonal line. Now, this line is going to come in handy later on when we start talking about how the pieces move. So now we know the names of each square on the board, right? We know the name of each square on the board. So the next thing is I'm going to try to introduce some of the pieces we have on the board. So I'm going to start with the little one, the very, very, very little one, which is called the pawn. Now, in the game of chess, the pawn can either move one step or two steps. So that means if you have a pawn, normally you have 8 pawns. We have 8 pawns on the board. And anytime you have the white pieces, your pawns are set up on the second rank. If you have the black pieces, your pawns are set up on the 7th rank. This is very important to know. Your pawns are set up on the 7th rank. So if you have the black pieces, your pawns are on the 7th rank. If you have the white pieces, your pawns are on the second rank. Now, the pawns can either move one step or two steps at any point in time. They can either move one step or two steps. So what's the criteria of moving two steps? Very good question. All the pawns on the second rank can move two steps for the first time. When your pawns are moving for the very first time, they can move two steps. That means all the pawns on the second rank can move two steps, either two steps here, or here, or here, or here, or here, or there. The same thing with the black pieces. The black pawns can move either two steps, either two steps, either two steps. Now, after the two steps, you can only move one step afterwards. Don't forget that. After the two steps, you can only move one step afterwards. So all the pawns can move two steps right if they're on the original squares. Now, if you have the white pieces, your pawns are originally on the second rank. If you have the black pieces, your pawns are on the 7th rank. So the pawns can move two steps. So let's do a little test right here. I'm going to set up some pawns on the board. I like to ask a lot of questions even when I'm teaching. So now here's the question. How many of the white pawns on the board can move two steps? I'm going to give us like a few seconds to think about it and give our response. How many of the pawns on the white side can move two steps? Okay, yeah. We have 3 pawns. Why is it 3 pawns? Remember what we said earlier. The pawns can only move two steps when they are on the original squares. That is when they're on the starting position. And if we look at this position here, we have only 3 pawns that are on their starting positions. All the other pawns have moved. So what are the pawns? We have the pawn on B2. It's on the original square. We have the pawn on D2, and we have the pawn on H2. Now, note how I was able to use the notation that we spoke about earlier to determine the location of the pawns. Now, what about the other pawns on A3, C4, E3, F4, G3? Now, these pawns cannot move two steps. Why? Because they are not on the original squares. Let's do the same test for the black pawns. So what if we have a black pawn is on H6, there's a pawn on G5, there's a pawn on F6, there's a pawn on E6, there's a pawn on C5, there's a pawn on A5, and remember what we said about the notation. That's the A file, the B file, the C file, all the way to the H file. And that's the first rank, the second rank, the third rank, all the way to the 8th rank. So looking at the black pawns, how many of the black pawns can move two steps? I'm going to give us a few seconds to figure that out. How many of these black pawns can move two steps? Okay, and I think you guessed that right. We have 2 black pawns that can move two steps. We have the pawn on B7 because it's still on the original square, and we have the pawn on D7, which is still on the original square. Very good. So we're going to clear the board again. Now we know how the pawn moves. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is how do the pawns capture? I'm going to talk about this as well, because with chess, the only difference between the pawns and the pieces is the pieces can capture the same way they move. but the pawns cannot do that. There's a certain way the pawn needs to make a capture. Like I said, this video is for total beginners, just for you to learn the game. Like I said earlier, the pawns can move two steps. So let's make a move for white. White moves his pawn to d4. All right. And of course, with the move d4, you're controlling one of the critical center squares. We have four center squares. We have the e4, d4, e5, and d5. So the pawn goes to e4, d4, sorry. If black plays his own pawn to d5, now these pawns are blocking each other. They cannot move anywhere. So they are pretty much stuck. So let's say now white decides to make the move c4. Now, by moving the pawn to c4, the pawn on c4 is attacking the pawn on d5. So the question I asked earlier, how do pawns capture? Pawns capture diagonally to the side, either to the left or to the right. They can only move forward either one step or two steps, but they can capture to the side, either to the left or to the right. So in this situation, the pawn on d5 can capture the pawn on c4. That's how the pawn moves. So let's make another move. Let's say white plays the move e4 and black plays the move c5. Now, do you see any way a pawn can make a capture in this position? Is white's turn to play? Yes, there is a way. White can simply capture the pawn on c5. Like I said, the pawns capture diagonally to the left or to the right, just one step. But they can only move forward, but they can capture the side. So if it is white's turn to play in this situation, white simply grabs the pawn on c5. So the pawns moved forward, but they capture to the side diagonally, either to the left or to the right. So let us talk about the other pieces on the board. So originally, when you have a chess position, it looks like this. This is how all the pieces are set up when you want to start the game of chess. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the board, and then I'm going to put the pieces on the board one after the other and give us the name of the piece and how the piece moves. So I'm going to start with the bishop. Normally we have two bishops. There's one right here and there's another right there. So I have a question. Like I said, I like to ask a little questions. The bishops, we have two bishops. One is on the dark square and one is on the light square. Now, what's the name of the square the dark square bishop is on? Can anybody give a guess about that? Yes, it's on the C1 square. How is it C1? This is A file, B file, C file. It's on the C file, right? And it's on the first rank. So the dark square bishop is on C1, while the light square bishop is on F1. So we have the light square bishop on F1 and a dark square bishop on C1. So how do the bishops move? Remember I said earlier on in the game of chess, we have three lines. We have the vertical, up and down. We have the horizontal, left to right. And then we have the diagonal. Now, the bishop on C1 can move on a straight line, and it has to be on the same color. So the bishop on C1 can move all the way to either H6, that's a diagonal movement. So that means the bishop on C1 moves to H6, or it can move as far as just D2, as long as there's nothing stopping it. Or it can move as far as F4, bishop from C1 to F4, the F file, the fourth rank. Same thing with the light square bishop. The light square bishop can move from the square F1 all the way to A6. That's a long diagonal, all the way to A6, right? And of course, from A6, it can also go all the way to the square C8. The bishop is only going to stay on the light squares throughout the game. Only on the light squares throughout the game. So we have the bishops, right? Now, the next piece I'm going to talk about is the rook. We have one rook on A1, the other rook on H1. Now, how does the rook move? The rook moves vertically, so that means it can go all the way from A1 to A8 in one move. And also in another move, it can move horizontally. It can move from the square H8 all the way, A8 all the way to the square H8. So for example, if I want to make a rook movement, I can move the rook from A1 all the way to A8. And in the next move, I can move from A8 all the way to H8, right? Of course, I can move back and I can go all the way back. Now, it's very important, like we learned, that the pieces can move as far as they have the opportunity to. For example, if we have a pawn on A3 and there's a pawn on B2. Now, how many squares can this rook move to? What do we think? We have just two squares. It can either go to the A2 square vertically, or you can go to the B1 square horizontally. So the pieces, it's very important you learn that the pieces can move as much as you allow them to. And of course, the only way you allow the pieces to move as free as possible is making sure you don't have pawns blocking them. So I'm going to take the pawns off the board. Now, the rook, like I said, the rook can go vertically up and down, and it can go side to side horizontally. So the next piece I'm going to introduce is the knight. I normally like to bring the knight in later on in the game. So we have the knight on B1, we have the knight on G1. The knight has a very unique way of movement, just like a regular horse. The knight moves 2 steps forward, 1, 2, and 1 to the side, right? So from here, I can move the knight right there. The knight moves 2 steps forward, 1, 2, 1 to the side. I can move right there. So the knight moves in an L shape, right? Or an inverted L, right? It can also move in number 7 shape or an inverted 7. Anyhow, you can make that shape work. That means it could also be like that. As long as it's the 2 steps, 1, 2, and 1, anyhow. And one thing you also have to realize with the knight, when the knight is on the light square, when it moves, it's going to get on the dark square. When the light moves from a dark square, it's going to get to the light square. So remember that. That's going to also help us, remember how the knight moves. From the light square, the knight is going to get on the dark square, right? Same thing with the knight here. It's 2 steps forward, 1 to the side. You can either go left or right, or you can either go left. So that's how the knight moves. So the next piece I'm going to talk about is the queen and the king. I'm going to start with the king first. Now, the king moves a step anywhere, a step, just one step, one step. There's a saying that the king is the laziest piece on the board. That's not far-fetched. Yes, the king really doesn't have a lot of, the king is not that mobile. So when you have a king, you want to make sure all your pieces are protecting your king, because if your king has to run for safety, your king can't run much. So the king can move a step anywhere, right? Remember that. The king can move one step in every direction. Whereas the queen, she combines the power of the bishop and the rook. What do I mean by that? The queen can move vertically, like the rook. She can move horizontally, like the rook. She can move diagonally, like the bishop. She can move diagonally, like the bishop. She can go diagonally, like the bishop. And she could go diagonally, like the bishop. And she can go horizontally, like the rook. So the difference between the king and the queen is the king can move a step towards any direction. The queen can move multiple steps towards every direction. The only way the queen cannot move is the queen cannot move like a knight. No, that would be an illegal move. So the queen can move any square to any direction as long as it's a straight line. You can either make a vertical line or an horizontal line or a diagonal line. So that's how the queen moves. So the next thing I'm going to talk to us about real quickly before we end this session. Now, all the pieces on the board, they have names and they have values. So we have the rook on A1, there's a knight on B1, there's a bishop on C1, the queen is on D1, the king is on E1, the bishop is on F1, we have another knight on G1, and then there's a rook on H1. Now, the rook is worth 5 points, as in the number 5. The knight is worth 3 points. The bishop is worth 3 points. The bishop and knight have the same value. The queen is worth 9 points. The queen is the strongest piece on the chessboard. The king is pretty much priceless. We said the king is the most powerful. And when we say the king is the most powerful, we pretty much mean the king is the one that has the authority. Like being the president of a country, you can be the most powerful, but you're not necessarily the strongest person in that country. That will go to the queen. So the king is the most powerful, the queen is the strongest piece. And of course, we have the bishop, which is worth 3 points. The knight is worth 3 points. The rook is worth 5 points. Now, remember this, the queen and king are so important. You know, um, the aim of the game is to trap the king. But if you lose your queen, you are as good as dead because she's the one that really keeps everything in check. So let's do a quick recap about the things we did today. So we talked about each of the squares. We talked about the files running vertically up and down the board. All right. And then we talk about, we talk about the ranks running horizontally across the chessboard. It's very important to remember this stuff. Now, the reason why we need to learn this is because that allows us to name each square on the board, every little square on the board. We can name each square on the board just by putting the file and the rank together. So apart from that, then we learned how the pawns move. We said the pawns can only move 2 steps when they're on the original square. So we have the pawns on the original square on the second rank if you have the white pieces, and your pawns are on the original square on the 7th rank if you have the black pieces. So each of those pawns can move 2 steps when they're moving for the very first time. If those pawns can move 2 steps. Now remember, there's the pawns can move 2 steps, all right? But they can capture to the side 1 step, either to the left, or they can make a capture to the right. So that's how the pawn captures. So then we talk about all the pieces. We have the rook that goes vertically and then horizontally. Then we have the king that goes 1 step anywhere, any direction, 1 step, any direction. Then we have the knight that moves in an L shape. Then we have the bishop that moves diagonally. If you have a light square bishop, it stays on the light square. If you have a dark square bishop, it stays on the dark square. And then we have the queen that can move like the rook, and it can move like the bishop. And remember this, all the pieces can capture the same way they move. All the pieces can capture the same way they move. Okay, so we are going to stop this for now, and we're going to be back again with some other instructions to help you get the game of chess going if you're a total beginner. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for always being here. And the idea of this video, like I said, was based on the number of emails that I got. And I decided to make this video on behalf of the DC Chess Association. And you could see their logo right there, which I'm a member of. And we're trying to promote the game in the DMV area as much as possible. We're trying to spread the gospel of chess as much as possible. All right. Thank you again. And it's always nice to be here. See you soon. Take care and God bless. Bye for now.